Each day we would drop in a tadpole or a worm and watch ghoulishly as the dragonfly larva's face unfolded into telescopic pincers with which it snatched and devoured its unsuspecting prey. By the following spring, my efforts to encourage wildlife in the garden were really beginning to pay off. I noticed huge queen bumblebees fresh from hibernation feeding on the pussy willow and lungwort. These bees had been asleep for 7 months or so since the previous July, so the spring feast I had grown for them was particularly welcome. Once satiated, the queens would fly low over the ground, searching for a suitable hole in which to nest. I noticed a white-tailed bumblebee queen investigating the space under one of the garden sheds, and she must have liked it, for weeks later her smaller workers appeared, flying out to gather food and coming back half an hour later with enormous balls of bright yellow pollen on their legs. I sat and watched them for hours, and noticed the nest traffic becoming busier and busier as the season went on and the number of workers rapidly grew. No bees ever showed any interest in nesting in my purpose-made bumblebee nest chamber beneath the rockery. As summer approached, the garden began to swarm with wildlife. The buddleia was covered with small tortoiseshells, peacock butterflies, large and small whites, hoverflies and bumblebees. Pond skaters and whirligig beetles fought territorial battles on the surface of my new pond, and an emperor dragonfly took up residence perching on a tall purple leucostrife growing in the pond margin. It would zoom out to catch other flying insects to eat, snatching them mid-air with its bristly legs, and chase away any other dragonflies that tried to move in on its patch. I remain to this day amazed at how quickly wildlife appears in a garden if you just give it a little encouragement. On one occasion, after a heavy summer rainstorm, I found a number of bedraggled bumblebees clinging to my buddleia and decided to dry them out. Unfortunately for the bees, I was perhaps a bit too young to have a good grasp of the practicalities. With hindsight, finding my mum's hairdryer and giving them a gentle blow-dry might have been the most sensible option. Instead, I laid the torpid bees on the hot plate of the electric cooker, covered them in a layer of tissue paper and turned the hot plate onto low. Being young, I got bored of waiting for them to warm up and wandered off to feed my vicious little gerbils. Sadly, my attention didn't return to the bees until I noticed the smoke. The tissue paper had caught fire, and the poor bees had been frazzled. I felt terrible. My first foray into bumblebee conservation was a catastrophic disaster. This did not bode well for the future. But at least I had learned that there was an upper temperature limit beyond which bumblebees are not happy. As we shall see later, a similar principle explains why there are few bumblebees in Spain. I was an avid fan of Gerald Durrell's books, particularly those about his childhood growing up in Corfu, collecting all sorts of exciting animals and keeping them in his bedroom. He had owls, snakes and turtles, and, what is more, he never had to go to school. He was taught at home by an eccentric tutor who was more interested in sword fighting than algebra. He even had a donkey to carry all his collecting nets and jam jars. Deeply envious, I did my best to follow in his footsteps, making do with the slightly more mundane fauna of Shropshire. I badgered my poor parents into letting me keep an array of pets, starting with guinea pigs, rabbits, hamsters and mice. My brother and I mercilessly wore our parents down until they agreed to let us have a dog, a lovely black Labrador cross puppy that, with a total failure of imagination, we named Spot after the white spot on her back. As she grew, this spot rapidly disappeared, which made her name the cause of occasional confusion. Nevertheless, she was an incredibly soft and tolerant dog, who put up with our endless teasing and was a great companion in our romps in the countryside. After the novelty of my traditional pets wore off, I moved on to more exotic tropical fish, leopard frogs, red-eared terrapins, garter snakes and anolis lizards. I had my own bedroom with a view of the chestnut tree, and I filled this room with homemade boxes and tanks, from which all but the most dim-witted creatures invariably escaped. My garter snakes spent more time out of their tank than in it. In desperation, I tried using sticky tape to hold the lid down, with unfortunate consequences. One of the snakes still managed to push up the lid, but then became stuck to the tape, and in its attempts to disentangle itself became hopelessly wrapped up in a ball of tape. It took me hours to tease it apart. I resigned myself to regular hunts for escapees, and it's quite possible that a garter snake is to this day living somewhere under the floorboards of that house. For one birthday I was given a small aviary for the garden, which I stocked with budgerigars and a pair of beautiful Chinese painted quails. As an adult, I find keeping birds in cages cruel, especially large parrots in small cages indoors, but as a boy I wasn't worried about such sensibilities. I loved sitting in the aviary with the birds flying about my head. Before long the budgies started to breed, and I was able to supplement my pocket money by selling the surplus stock. The quails also laid plenty of eggs, but they never seemed to hatch. Baby budgies are spectacularly ugly, bald creatures with oversized heads. Normally they rapidly grow feathers and become rather more cute, but one poor chick seemed unable to, and as it grew remained almost entirely bald. Eventually it attempted to fledge.